Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And before we start, of course, sorry for so late video. There were some technical issues and now we have resolved them. First, I would like to discuss with you Bilohorivka area. The Russian sources published the video of additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation on the base on the landfill. There were very heavy clashes and the Russians continue advancing, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the base of the landfill, and the Russians are getting closer and closer to establish complete encirclement over the Ukrainian positions on the landfill. So once again, if we return back on map, the Russians continue moving something like this, and they are going to move further, and the main Russian goal is to reach this territory. There are some small industrial area, intersections of few roads, and if the Russians are able to establish control over this territory, then the Russians will be able to cut the Ukrainian positions on the landfill from the mainland, and Ukrainians, after losing supply and support in the area, either will surrender or fall back or something else. For example, if we increase the numbers of days since the beginning of the month, I'll just remind you that on the 5th of April we got report about the Russian control over just this line. So by the 5th of April, so few days ago, the Russians established control over the three lines on the base of the landfill just by this line. And for the next few days, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and as you can see, they're continuing moving further to the north of Bilohorivka landfill. Furthermore, when talking about the southern direction, the Russians continue clearing operation with FPV drones. Very likely the next few days the Russians will conduct another offensive operation. It's just one question I have: when the Russians are going to do this, before reaching this let's say territory, or after? Because first, it's better, of course, to cut the supply from the area and only then to start the clearing operation. But maybe the Russians are going to make these two offensive operations synchronously. Now we are moving further to the south in direction of Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction, where we got significant number of details and updates. Lots of mappers, lots of reports, lots of sources on the ground are saying that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Bilohorivka. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back. The Ukrainians fell back towards Kalinovka, towards the strongholds on the northwestern part of the village. So once again, according to Russian sources, the territory was captured by the 20th Brigade, and if we summarize everything, by now the Russians control something like this in the area of Bilohorivka and Kalinovka. Of course, significant progress, significant result, but as we discussed in the previous videos, the thing is that the Russians control the lowlands. Of course, lowlands never stopped the Russians before, and obviously the lowlands are not going to stop the Russians right now, so they will continue pressure. And according to some sources, very reliable sources, the Russians have already entered the village by the name of Kalinovka. Currently, it's very difficult to understand how exactly the Russians entered the village. There are a few ways how to do this. The Russians might try to attack Kalinovka, let's say from the southern direction. Maybe the source was reported about the Russian progress over the tree lines towards these farms. For now, it's very difficult to understand, but according once again the Russians, they managed to establish complete control over the territory. Furthermore, the Russians, according to information we have, activated their let's say attacks towards Grigorovka, and today we got a lot of videos and geolocations confirming something like the beginning of artillery preparation. The Russians were bombing and pummeling the Ukrainian positions, and very likely they're going to start an offensive on this direction as well. The main purpose of the Russians to attack along this line to Grigorovka is to establish control over these intersections of the tree lines, and then to start moving towards the Ukrainian main defense belt on Bohdanivka hill. So the Russians are planning to defeat the Ukrainians there. The Ukrainians obviously will try to resist the Russians for a few days, maybe weeks, but anyway, sooner or later they will be forced to fall back on the Ukrainian side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. So the clashes are going to be very heavy here, and after that we may start seeing the battle for Chasiv Yar itself. So the situation is very complicated for the Ukrainians. Now we are moving further. We have additional updates on the southern Klishchiivka direction. The Ukrainian sources published the video of another attempt of Russian attack to attack the Ukrainian positions to the south of Avdiivka. So as we can see, after some certain success, certain progress on Chasiv Yar, Ivanovsky direction, the Russian forces to the south of Klishchiivka decided to attack the Ukrainian positions as well. So now the pressure the Ukrainians are suffering the pressure from the south, from Kurdyumovka and Zelenopolye, and very likely the Ukrainians either will be forced to fall back, because if they stay there, if they stay on this foothold, anyway, sooner or later they will be forced to fall back, and they will lose very important reserves that might be used by the Ukrainians somewhere in Chasiv Yar. So if you ask my opinion, I expect that Ukrainians will start withdrawing their positions very soon, maybe in a day, maybe in a week, maybe even by the end of the week. So we'll see anyway what is going to be next. Now we're moving further to Avdiivka direction. Different mappers, after yesterday we geolocated the Russian progress on the farms to the south of Novomykhailivka. Different mappers continue updating their maps, showing additional Russian progress. For now, it's let's say the situation completely covered with the fog of war. We can't tell for sure how the Russians managed to, let's say, establish control over the farms, and the most important, what the Russians are planning to do next. Either they're going to move further to Novomykhailivka ceramic, or the Russians just try to, let's say, force the Ukrainians to keep additional reserves. Very difficult to understand, but that significant progress is very important for the Russians. Obviously, they will try to dig in deeper to create long-term, let's say, defense constructions, and after that they can continue pushing further to ceramic, because the most important, the Russians have already entered, let's say, the residential part of ceramic. They don't need to cross fields. All these areas are located on the same hills, so there is no problems to continue moving further. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians conducted a lot of, let's say, aviation strikes in the area, a lot of ammo depots, a lot of positions, a lot of warehouses of the armed force of Ukraine were destroyed as a result of aviation strikes. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses in, let's say, in the close rear of, let's say, Avdiivka direction, as well as in the deep rear. For example, in the area of the village by the name of Pushkina, we received the video how the Ukrainians tried to unload their, let's say, trucks with munition, with tanks, with munition, with bullets, with missiles. The Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions, and as a result of strike, that warehouse was destroyed. We see secondary detonation, and obviously something big and very powerful was located in that warehouse. A little bit further to the northwest, in the village by the name of Udachna on the railways, the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian ammo depot that Ukrainians, another, let's say, truck with supply that Ukrainians brought to the area and tried to unload, but the Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions, and as a result of probably missile strike, maybe that was a Tornado S system or Iskander system, and as a result of strike, another ammo depot was destroyed. Very powerful damage for the Ukrainians. Of course, all these ammo depots, the main purpose of those ammo depots were to support Ukrainian forces in the area of Karlovka water reservoir. Now we see that Ukrainians may start facing some problems with munition. Furthermore, we expect today significant number of updates from Novomykhailivka. During the day, the Russians conducted significant number of attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions to the northwest of Novomykhailivka. There were lots of attacks using the personnel carriers, light vehicles. The Russians managed to bypass the Ukrainian defense belt. The Ukrainians, as you can see on the video, don't have possibilities to slow down the Russians. They're attacking them with artillery, but the Russians are too fast. The Russians have no problems to land infantry and then to safely return back. So the video was geolocated in the area. The Russians were moving something like this. Very likely they managed to land infantry, and then the personnel carriers moved back to the mainland. So for now, there is not so many, let's say, details and updates to color the territory of map, but very likely another, let's say, intersection of the tree lines in the area was captured by the Russians, and now we see the Russians are getting closer and closer to the eastern part, and very likely today we're going to receive the final confirmation, or maybe tomorrow, of the fall not just of Bohdanivka but also of Novomykhailivka. Also, we received significant number of FPV drone strikes inside the Vuhledar. Another day in a row the Russians are clearing the area. At first they were using FAPs, so flamethrower systems, missiles. Then the Russians were using artillery systems. Now the Russians are using, then the Russians were using drones, like long-range drones, to destroy communication equipment and so on. And now the Russians start using FPV drones above the Vuhledar itself to clear the area completely before very possible Russian ground operation with the purpose to establish complete and final control over Vuhledar. I'll remind you that during the previous phases the special military operation. The Russians conducted 4 attempts. Most of them were repelled by the Ukrainians, and so probably this, let's say, offensive, this attempt is going to be the final one. Furthermore, we got additional reports of the missile strikes during the previous night. Kryvyi Rog, and to be more precisely, energy facilities of Kryvyi Rog were under very heavy Russian missile fire. So according to information we have, according to different reports, the Russians are planning to establish complete blackout of a significant number of towns in Ukraine. For example, the Economist reported that Kremlin wants to make Ukraine's second city unlivable. So the Economist was talking about Kharkiv, but if you ask my opinion, Kharkiv is not the only town that suffers the same problem. Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Kryvyi Rog, Nikolaev, Odessa, all these towns in the very near future will be cut off completely from the energy and electricity, and then the population will be forced to abandon the areas, and this will release and give the Russians possibilities to start the ground operation and to release and to reduce the number of losses among civilians. Furthermore, when talking about Kharkiv, the local head of the region, military head of the region, announced a complete and total evacuation, at least of the northern regions of the Kharkiv region, and mainly he was talking about Bogadukhov area and Kharkiv area. So as you can see, according to him, the Ukrainians are planning to evacuate the area between the railways, or let's say along the railways, from Sumy to Kharkiv. So one of the most important logistic arteria, the population around one of the most important logistic arteria will be evacuated in the very near future. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.